you can go and sit on your nice driver's seat, sit down on the seat, but you're not going to go anywhere, right? You have a steering wheel attached to some wheels. You're not going to go anywhere. That all the elements of the car, the seat serves its function as a seat, right? You're sitting in it. That's what it does. But what's its higher purpose? Its higher purpose is to be part of a system that moves you from one destination to another. On its own, the seat doesn't do anything. I've got the player who's run 60 meters fastest in the league. But if he can't do that as part of the 15, or he makes bad decisions because every time he gets it, he tries to run as fast as he can, that doesn't serve a higher purpose or function.
Welcome to the Upside Strength Podcast, your number one resource for all things fitness and performance in Switzerland. On this episode, I'll be chatting with returning guest and ALTIS Program Director, Nick Ward. Hey, Nick. Good to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean. Great to be here.
So today we're going to focus specifically, this is a special episode, we're going to talk specifically about the new online course that ALTIS recently released. The course is called Need for Speed. So maybe for the audience, for those who are not aware of this course yet, in a few words, can you describe it, please?
Yeah, the Need for Speed course is focusing on team speed, more sort of field sports as well. Really aimed, at the strength and conditioning sort of performance coach world, and maybe, coaches in those sports that want a bit of better understanding of our perspective coming from the strength and conditioning field. And, it really takes us from the what is speed, how that really is being defined, and some of the issues of understanding and terminology around speed. Why is it important, and looking at a technical model of speed development and how people might learn that, and then really how to go about doing that. And we kind of focus a lot more on the how you make decisions of what's important to train. Sort of the content versus the context. So, on the field versus in the weight room, for example. Look at that. And, we focus a lot on acceleration and upright running. And we have great contributions from everyone from Dr. Ken Clark, Nick Rinkelman, Alex Natera, Sean Mishka, too many people to mention right now, but, huge contributions from people sharing their experiences. So, a huge kind of critical look at the area. So unapologetically, a lot of work to get through, but at the same time, a huge amount of practical takeaways that people can really apply in their work.
So you alluded to it in that answer, but I want to dig a little bit deeper for those who might have already taken, for example, coaching the short sprints, which is another course that you guys offer on the ALTIS educational platform. How is this course different?
So coaching the short sprints, I'd recommend that also to any strength and conditioning coach, because it just really breaks down. And that's how I learned, right? It was, I was working in track and field with Stuart McMillan years ago in Calgary. And I was like, oh, how does this apply to my soccer players? How does this apply outside of track and field? So for me, it's like a core thing that, but it is focused on track and field. It is the discipline. You not necessarily want to be learning about block starts if you're a team sport coach. So that's where it varies. It is looking within team sports. I'm sure we'll get into it, but the many ways that speed is expressed. In track and field, the context is running as fast as you can in a straight line. The context in team sports, as we know, is very multivariate and can change from development level and across the different sports too. So we really do take a real deep dive into the specifics of team sports, and not track and field.
So before we dive into the contents of the course itself, I want to talk about the structure of the course a little bit, because I find it really interesting. One thing that I noticed is that straight from the beginning, from the intro by Stu, you've included that idea of nonlinear learning in this course. In a sense, you have 3 main books, and Stu says right from the beginning, you might want to start from book 3 and then come back to book 1 and 2 later on. And I've never seen that anywhere else on an online, learning platform or course. So why did that come about, and how did you guys weave this concept into the course?
Think of your own learning experiences. You spend a whole week cramming for an exam. So it's linearly progressing content, and you go into that exam and you sit down, and what happens? You don't remember a thing. But then the next week you're studying for something else, and all this stuff just comes flooding back to you. Mm-hmm. I think the truth is, if we all analyze our own learning experiences, I think you would see it's non-linear. Mm-hmm. Even from a training perspective, you get that, I expect someone to improve by 20%. Well, one person in the group improves by 10%, someone improves by 30%, someone is 5% worse, and in this new age of learning, there's a huge part of self-education here, to give people the choice and options of how they want to construct, their learning approach. Mm. So we're saying you can start at book 3. Book 3 has been kind of written as a bit of a standalone in the fact that it layers in a lot of the information from books 1 and 2. So if you wanted to go back and really read the full lowdown, then go back as you're going through book 3, or wait till you finish book 3, assess where you feel your gaps are, and then start again at book 1 and book 2 as well. So I think really it comes from what we observe in real life, is that things are never linear. Things go around in cycles. They build and feed back upon each other, and also our ability to absorb content, understand it, and then synthesize it. That's probably the key element of this. From a general systems learning theory point of view, most academic learning is based on telling us what happens. I remember me doing my advanced level maths in England. Again, you guys will probably relate to some of these experiences. I love the fact that I got to the answer at the end of the equation, mm-hmm. but why? Why does that matter? So what we're trying to do really is look at the why. If we can explain the why, then that builds a deeper understanding of then how you're going to go about and apply that, rather than just giving people the what.
Yeah, so it's really like you said, it's a really well-developed thought process throughout this whole course, and it's not something you just digest in a few days. Like I know that I don't rush through courses, but I usually eat them up pretty quickly. And already when I took the short sprints coaching course from you guys, it took me a couple weeks to get through. Even dedicated, a whole day to each chapter, and trying to consume the extra material as well. How long does this course take to complete, start to finish? For obviously, there's going to be a range depending on how much time you invest in it, but just to give a general idea on the question.
Yeah. So I'd say probably around 45 days if you're working on it daily. Mm-hmm. The idea is that each book is divided into sessions, and each session is anywhere between 20 and 40 minutes of that moment sit-down time. Mm. Now, saying that, we kind of warn you in advance, there's some overtime or extra time activities that you may choose to do, again, based on how you want to construct your learning. So the deeper dives, mm-hmm. They are nice to know. And obviously we wouldn't put it in there if we didn't feel it was important to know, but they're not essential to know to allow you to keep going with a rhythm and a flow, mm-hmm. As well. So, you get to book 3 and, really it's, hey, let's take one session a day there as well. So you're talking there's 20 days mm-hmm. for book 3. I'm not sure if you want to get how deep you want to get into the structure of the course, but we have 2 kind of theoretical training camps within the course as well. In book 2, Dr. Ken Clark does 11 videos and series of sessions there, really doing quite, great analysis on acceleration, from the technique, from the biomechanics, from the forces, from the muscles, and the same for upright running as well. And it's like, hey, yeah, this is a pretty intensive period with that. So we treat it like a training camp. It's solid, and there are opportunities, obviously, to review the videos, the references that are there, and you're seeking information at that stage. It gives you the opportunity to make sense of it as well and organize what's relevant to you. That will be specific to where you are right now as a coach and what you feel you need to know on Monday for you to go and apply some of this stuff and do something a little bit different. So yeah, it's a good 45 days solid. If you let's say 20 minutes to 40 minutes a day throughout the weeks, again, depending on how much of the other activities you want to join in on, can just broaden and extend the experience of being on this course. So I think you kind of mentioned it really just now. It's not a tick box, right? It's not, yeah, I've done that, check it off.
Right.
You're living this, right? There's things to live through and experience while you're doing that. And we can talk more about the engagement structures if you want to talk about that in a bit.
Yeah, I want to come back to those, but to begin with, how is the course today as it is available to everybody? How is it different from the initial idea that Stu drafted in the beginning? What elements have kind of added themselves to the party along the way, so to speak?
Stuart wrote out a storyboard back in February, March of how he perceived the course. And not to sound too corny, but then, things happen. So your perceptions change a little bit. And so, of course, things were adapted. But actually what was quite interesting, once we got very near the completion of it, he pulled out his storyboard, and it was so close to his original kind of perception of it. But clearly we were able to build out different elements, and me joining in and jumping in to expand the coursiness of it, but without it being an academic course, the kind of learning activities that flow through it. As we started getting more content, how do we make this more transformational for people, not just giving them information? Some things did kind of change, as I was interviewing, more and more amazing, experts on the sport performance world. It was like, hey, this could be really good in book one. So I had to go back and kind of change a few things. So, it wasn't like we just got book one done and that's it. It's going to sit, and we kept looking back non-linearly, kept looking back. Hey, how can this bit change? How does actually these two sessions could probably be squashed together. This one, that's two separate sessions now. So there was continual reflection all the way through it, rather than just being done in a very linear, chunky kind of fashion. So there's connections all the way through it, which I believe really helps the learning experience that the people taking this course will have.
For you, and with the role that you had in building this course, what was your biggest challenge?
I think, first of all, the biggest challenge is who are we writing it for? Let's understand our audience, the avatar. And, we have such a great community out there, from beginner coaches. Track and field is obviously huge for us. Elite coaches, people in professional sports and amateur sports, part-time coaches. So, you want to feel like it's for everybody. And of course I want to say, yes, it's for everybody. There's definitely something everybody can get from this course. But I think it was, really just in my mind saying, maybe it's the, 3 to 5 plus years, maybe 8 years kind of S&C coach, as they've been in the trenches, and also that they're not necessarily very familiar with speed. We're all very familiar with the weight room. We spend most of our time in the weight room. And really, in a way, it was a little bit of a homage to my own career development, that I didn't have big weight rooms, fancy weight rooms, $1 million facilities. And I kind of learned through being out in the field, being with the sports coach,
Mhm.
And then, weight room access was pretty minimal in my early days, this was the old days of piggybacks, the resistance was your teammate, right?
Right.
you know, those days, right? I mean, some
Absolutely.
of us are still doing that now. And I think the appeal to maybe some of our part-time and amateur coaches out there is that, hey, really encourage you to be in the field. That's really where this stuff is being applied. What do you see then from out there that the weight room can help you manage? Don't get the weight room put onto the field because, famous comments from the Chelsea coach the other year, right? He's never seen anyone running on a football field with a barbell on his back. Now, don't crucify me for saying that, right? But it's about what is the applicability.
Mhm.
So I do feel any S&C coach out there that has an opportunity to go and coach track and field, go and be an assistant, go and coach rugby, be a soccer coach, try and be a sports coach where you can. Because I do think that gives you another alternative perspective on our profession as strength and conditioning coaches, but where are we relevant? And so that was one of the challenges, was making sure that the skills practices, the tasks, the development plans had real relevance to someone who may have limited exposure to speed development, to really help them grow their understanding of that and target those assignments appropriately, that it would kind of encourage them to go and learn by doing and try some of this stuff out, rather than it just be an informational text-based course.
Yeah, so let's dive right into the content now of the course. One of the big pieces of this course is the Gamespeed model. And so I'll put it up on the screen for everybody to look at while you talk about it, but I'll leave the floor to you. What is the Gamespeed model?
Well, I'm going to pull the lens back a little bit from that, because it really comes from a question that you probably find yourself asking. When we train for speed, probably traditionally as S&C coaches, we always train speed as an ability. More often than not, they turn into endurance sessions, right? Tolerance sessions. We run sprints. That's what we do. So we train it as an ability.
Mm-hmm.
How fast can you be? But when we start thinking about it in the sport itself, that's now in context. So how much of speed do we train as a skill? So from the ALTIS Gamespeed model really derived from, well, is speed an ability or is it a skill? And, we refer back to, Pullman's work and the categorization, and Bus did a great interview with Andreas, looking at those classifications of skills and abilities. And, what's kind of happened in our strength and conditioning world is that we come up with, the three big S's, right? Strength, speed, and stamina, or it's endurance, flexibility, the big five.
Mm.
When you go deeper beyond that, I mean, there's a whole group of German academics looking at this question, right? What are skills and abilities, and their definitions of how they break all those down. So it then begs the question of, once you have an understanding, is it a skill and ability? What do we train, content or context?
Mm-hmm.
We have to start asking ourselves, let's try and stop being so certain. What's more plausible in what we train? So the model then, as you see, then really broke those two things out at the beginning. We got speed. So what is it? Well, it could be, information-oriented, coordinative ability, skills, or over here it's more energetically determined skills. And then from that, it's like, well, again, so what do we see when we play the game? Well, there's decision-making, there is linear speed, and then there's this enduring speed. And linear speed then kind of sits into both of those branches, both information and also energetics. But the enduring speed stuff is, getting the work done. And we broke those down then to the next sort of number of categories there, 10, I think. And so that's really what it built on. I mean, do you kind of see where I'm going with that kind of skills versus abilities kind of conundrum that we're in?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it does. Well, it's already really interesting because, like you said, or we talked about this when I had you on previously, talked about how you can coach numbers, but you can coach shapes as well. And so there's that technicality to to the sprint itself. It's not just an output thing that you do, and now you layer on top of that the scale of decision making in a game situation in regards to speed into agility and where you're going to put your foot, how high off the floor are you, can you take that step. So it does, like you said, it puts it into context, and it does make it, that much more complex now that it is in the game context. But it is the gray area that, everything happens in, and we have to, if we can parse out what happens there, then we might get a better understanding of how to actually do our job.
Yeah. And I think what it also highlighted for us, and, we asked obviously a lot of the coaches, what does speed mean to them? And as you'd imagine, you get a lot of different definitions, meanings of speed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing the game speed model then also tries to address is, within those kind of classifications of skill and or ability. Clearly it's both, right? But it's at what level of emphasis you place, or where do you start your observation of a player? Do you start your observation of a player based on their 30-meter sprint time, or do you base your observation of a player based on what they do in the game? So, are you going to take an athlete first approach, or do you take a game first approach? And traditionally, what do? We test people. We get a battery of tests. We say, this person's fast, and this person fast, and this person fast, and this person. And, if you're sixth in that rank, someone's going, oh, you've got to get a lot faster. You're the sixth fastest in the team. Chances are when it comes to the field, that between first, there's probably not a lot of difference out there on the actual field, right? And obviously not positional specific. And that's where the skill side comes in, right? How do I truly express that ability when all those, cognitive and perceptual decision-making components are combined in there? And, then, you might say, well, that's not my job at that point. I've made them fast, or I've made them strong. You can go to another layer. I never get a chance to make people sprint, but we know strength is highly correlated, with vertical and horizontal force production. So as long as I get them strong, they're going to be faster. And to an extent, that's right. That can work, right? Then, what's the efficiency? What's the effectiveness? Are they, because of the way they're now moving, although they're using this new strength, is that potentially putting them in harm's way? Because they are able to do more now, but they've never been taught the efficient technique of running in there too. So I think it just, again, it looks at all different components, subcomponents of what we might define as speed. We know there's great people out there who are bigger experts than ALTIS in general around things like, change of direction, maneuverability, perception, action, those things as well. That's why we invited all those people to come and talk and share their expertise in all those different sections of it. And, again, readily admitting we struggle with a common language. And partly that is the commercial world. We all want to sound different. We all want to sound super sexy. So let's call it something completely different. But the scientists, need to agree on good terminology and set definitions. So we know we're comparing apples to apples. Certainly in the repeat sprintability world, that's a mess. If you've got to look quite carefully at the methodologies to actually see what people are truly assessing in those. So it helps us really examine what we know about our own sports. I think if you look at any of the subcomponents in any of the branches on that model, you can go to your own sport, whether it be rugby, lacrosse, soccer, field hockey, ice hockey, any of those sports, and say, okay, let's do a lit search. Let's see what's known, and then let's find out people who work in those sports and let's speak to them about it. And it almost gives you an opportunity, to research. Those different elements, but also I think the model also allows you to prioritize as well then your kind of hierarchy of KPIs of those different subcomponents right now for this team and the way they're playing and the way the coach is setting this up. In a way, which of those boxes, this is the way my mind works, which of those boxes do I blow out? Do I color differently. You know, I would use that totally to sketch and, you know, create a little mind map for myself. But then that individual player, when I look at them, then how do they fit that picture? So now you're saying, well, the game and the way this coach is playing this game is demanding this. Can they meet those demands in their current shape? And think about rugby, right? What we're involved in. Well, rugby league for me as well, they changed the replacement law, right? So you go from 12 to 10 replacements. Then you go from 10 to 8. Now, you get 6 to 8 months notice of that change. You have a chance then with your players to maybe change something about their fitness and conditioning. So that game speed model alters now. Your big prop forwards who now, you know, you can't interchange 4 or 5 times. You've got to stay on for longer. So it just blows up a different part of that diagram for you to help you make some decisions in your kind of thinking processes. The coach who says, hey, this is the play I'm working on right now, and why is my scrum half not fast enough? You ain't going to change that in a week, right? As well. And, you know, fascinating conversation with Mark Aston at Sheffield Eagles this week. So I asked him that question. I said, how do you influence game speed? Do you do it based on the players that you've got, or the way you want to play? This is the way I want to play. You know, it's how we decide where the start positions are on the field, how we spot defenders, so we're going to roll them over, which builds momentum and tempo, you know, as well. And I said, so then what if you've got a player, though, who doesn't have that ability to perform that for you? I said, well, yeah, it is a process of kind of backwards and forwards in that. But more often than not, he said, I find it's the fact they're not reading the game. You know, that player could be in a different position before they've got to kind of explode through that gap. How are they shaping up, you know, reading their position in time and space, you know, as well. And that's fascinating to have those conversations with a head coach about how they determine they influence the speed of a game.
Since you guys talk about it in the course, can you just explain for those who are maybe not fully aware of the OODA loop, this perception action coupling that you're talking about, reading the game, reacting to what you see, and not just running in a straight line? So how did you guys bring that into the course?
Well, first of all, I'm no expert in perception action coupling, but I think it's something which I try to, you know, definitely take into consideration. And again, go back to the ALTIS Gamespeed model. You're looking at that decision-making component of the game. You know, do I stand still? When do I go? So think of, you know, again, our common sport is rugby here, right? So, you know, you've got, you know, from a defensive point of view, you've got line speed. You know, I can just run at a straight line, but then the ball's over here somewhere, right? So do I have to change my angle of run? At what point do I just get off the line to go at someone based on what I see? Now, part of that might be I'm trying to close down space and time for the attacking team. So I'm going to disrupt the decision they think they're going to make. But that's based on what I've scanned. And I think part of scanning an elite players is they just see pictures way quicker. And one of the reasons you do video analysis, right, of the other teams is that you try to understand their patterns, you know, so by you showing those players the patterns, maybe out on the field, you recognize it, so you know what's going to happen, you know, or you're going to predict what's going to kind of happen. But then something else happens, so your action has to change, right, as well. So you can get out there just as fast as hell and close them down, deny their space, and that's starting speed, boom, I've gone. Now, you go too soon, the referee is blowing that whistle, penalty, right? You've gone beyond the line. So there's a decision, right? What am I responding to, right, in order for me to get started? And then you've got the acceleration phase. There's probably going to be some deviation direction, but you've probably spotted a player you're going after at this point, you know, or you're holding your line because you know they're going to come back on the inside into that space. That's what you're expecting. And you know you've got enough men out there. But then, you know, the play evolves. You've got people coming around the back of the play, right? And now you're getting stretched thin out there, so you're shuffling across. So the game just evolves, and it's the different movements. Often, once upon a time, I wrote an article called The Art of Speed. And it was, you know, what's that initial action? How are you then responding to what you see, and what's your transitional movements you put yourself into before you can act again. And I kind of see that it's that action that, what am I responding to? How am I transitioning before I need to go and act again? I kind of stole that a lot from Ian Jeffries' work and stuff with Jared Deacon and Duncan French and Nick Grantham and those guys for me to kind of come up with that model in speed. You mentioned perception action. What's the other part of the question?
Yeah, it was explain what it entails and how that applies to the game, really, because it's funny, growing up and playing rugby in my later teens, it was never imparted to me that you had to read what was in front of you. It was very strategically driven, if I may use that term, where we had, set pieces and we knew set moves that we did, and maybe it was lucky to play with players that had experienced rugby at a higher level and that did that instinctively. But I rarely, thought about those things. But now seeing this now and I, thinking, should I've done something differently? It would have definitely been, okay, what is in front of me? Because it does influence what you're going to do and what decision you're going to take to a high degree. But then I guess it depends what your background is and who your coach is, but it's not always emphasized as being, hey, this is actually what should drive, or not always, but in many situations, especially open play, that is probably what should inform whether you should, go wide, stay tight, or kick over the top. But it's interesting that you guys have, even included that aspect of things.
Pete Atkinson, kind of talks about, sometimes, just try to run fast. It's probably going to make you faster. And I could think of myself, for, the level I played at North Shields Rugby Club was, I remember being about 38 and playing in the centres for the first team and kind of almost like joking to myself, go on, go for that gap. And I knew I wasn't that fast, right? But just that confidence to just go for the gap. All of a sudden the defenders do something different. They weren't expecting it. Right. So it just by what you do changes the picture. Yeah. And that's coaching, right? And again, as an S&C coach, what can we do to give players that confidence? An example was when I was with Newcastle United Academy, there's a young fullback there, and Alan Irvin, who was my director there at the time, was like, he just doesn't go out and close down hard. I need him to go and close down. And quite simply, the guy just read the space between him and where that ball's being played. Somehow his brain's computing time, and it made him hesitant. So it was actually even worse when he hesitated, then went, right? Because now he completely changed the structure of the defense behind him as well, because they're obviously playing off him as the nearest guy to the ball. But then, just giving him the confidence that when he put his foot down, he felt fast, led to different decisions, I believe, and I can't prove that, but I think the one thing that I like about perception action coupling and conforming to my own biases is that, just help people feel quick. And I think they'll start making some different decisions. Now, whether they're the right or wrong decision, that's part of the game, right? Yeah. So it just gives them another tool, I think, to utilize. And I think the other side of it as well is not just making people faster, but how do you ensure that they're in an environment where they can be fast? And Fergus Connolly talks a lot about the role of fatigue in sport. And you look at the game speed model again, you've got the mass stuff there as well as starting speed. Well, clearly they're not hugely related, right? But, George Carver-Howard talks about the fact that he realized that actually one of the things he had to do was build the aerobic capabilities of his team so they could potentially recover quicker from the high intensity components rather than actually just make people faster. So there's a level of energy management, I think, that has to go on as well, which allows that individual player to express their speed capacity. Think about ourselves, right? We go in the weight room and we got, a 95% day on cleans or whatever, and you're like, ugh, I feel so sluggish today. You put the velocity-based stuff on you, and you know what? You might still clean that load, but your velocity is down by 20%. In that situation, it doesn't matter, right? There's no significance of that. We don't need to be that precise, right? Yeah. in a game, that little bit of difference can be a yard or half a yard, or failing to turn as quick, and that can be quite significant. So I think there is a level of game management that has to go on, or player management, that if you want a player to be fast, make sure they're not going into a game completely knackered, basically.
Yeah, and or being able to repeat those efforts later in the game. I mean, for me, right now, the play that pops out is Bowden Barrett. Anytime you see him just, like you said, put his foot down, he sees there's, a half a second delay on one of the defenders drifting, and he just sees that hole, and he knows he can get through it. And often he gets through untouched. So he either knows he has to, just pass the ball, just do his job, or he has to, if he sees an opportunity, just take it. And like you said, have the confidence to just go for it and get through.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Do you have an example of, to get back to your prior point of running in a straight line is good, but it's not exactly what you're going to see on the field? Do you have a practical example of maybe an athlete that you've worked with who was great in training and great in linear sprinting, but then once you put him on a pitch, he just couldn't express his speed in as well as he did outside the game context?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of examples, and one I'd give an example of a player who was relatively fast, but once he got on the pitch, because the game isn't running straight lines, and he had to stop, decelerate, turn, his way of turning was like seeing an iceberg turn in Antarctica right now, right? It was big curve, So it was fast at getting there. And, maybe on a broader conceptual side, deceleration in younger athletes is not well trained. I think we can spend more time on helping them to slow down quicker than to speed up faster. So I tend to emphasize much more of my younger athlete training on deceleration. Of course, in order to decelerate effectively, you've got to accelerate as well. But focusing on their confidence to stop and stop safely, confidence to stop side on both sides, confidence to stop and go again, was become more critical, I felt, than just teaching acceleration in the younger athletes. Because part of the way you vary those practices then is that you say, okay, let's increase our entry speed now. It's a bit like, those TV commercials, those really horrible TV commercials where you see a child getting knocked down at 40 miles an hour and 30 and 20, and the difference, your entry speed is going to be obviously dictate how quickly you stop. So you can use that as a variation in the drill, right? Start bringing back the acceleration distances, which is going to result in a faster speed from which you've got to decelerate at. That's a way of bringing variability into those drills. Sometimes I'd set up practices where the square or the triangles were just different dimensions, and as the players went through, they just demanded different things of them. So that was me doing work at the content side of it, and then it's like, how do we bring sort of the skill execution side in as well? And that's where this one particular player, like I said, was great at closing a player down, which was good in some instances because he might force the pass backwards, but if the player put a move on them, they were running straight past them, right? Now the other story would be players that are fast players, and especially in the rugby, we had QLT as a fullback, Rob Warrancy as a winger out there as well. Anytime they didn't feel their body was moving smoothly, you could see they weren't confident to sprint. So you had to really work with them, and certainly the full-time environment of Sheffield Eagles, rather than the part-time environment, giving more opportunity to manage them throughout the week. So with that player, they're fast, but there's something stopping them expressing that. And you can see it in training, and you've got to work with them on that, because they are real confidence beasts. And you need to make sure they don't feel they're going to pull a hamstring, for example. And it's not to say that high-speed running training helps people pull hamstrings. That's how you're managing the situation, the problem you're dealing with, And that's why, the key mechanics are key as well. And you just start noticing how their hips and shoulders are not undulating or not oscillating, harmonically that they normally do. And, you get this by, watching video and game video of them. You get a feel for the identity, that behavior of that player. So you got to work with that to try and bring that confidence back for sure.
I want to go now into a couple sessions from the course itself. So in book 3, session 2, the title is "The System is the Solution." So what does it mean?
That's a really good question. Well, let's first of all maybe think about what do we mean by a system. So within a system, the sum of all the parts will always be greater than the whole. It's not just the sum of the parts. So in a system, we have elements. Those elements are interconnected and interrelated, and they all serve a higher function. Putting them together serves a higher function. There's some great YouTube clips, by the way, by a guy called Russell Ackoff. That's if anyone's interested. Really cool to listen to on this, and he gives the analogy of a motor car, right? You can go and sit on your nice driver's seat, sit down on the seat, but you're not going to go anywhere, right? You have a steering wheel attached to some wheels. You're not going to go anywhere. That all the elements of the car, the seat serves its function as a seat, right? You're sitting in it. That's what it does. But what's its higher purpose? Its higher purpose is to be part of a system that moves you from one destination to another. On its own, the seat doesn't do anything. The engine can sit, and you can get the engine on a workbench in an auto yard. The engine can run. Great, but it's not taking you from A to B. It needs everything else as part of the component, The other analogy, think of the human body. The heart on its own, it has a job as a cardiovascular system. But take it out of the body, what does it do? It has to link to the respiratory system. It has to link to the muscles. Mm-hmm. So understanding that there has to be connectedness and that has to serve a higher purpose. The next thing then on it is to understand that systems nest in amongst each other. So let's talk about, think about it. Let's talk about speed, right? George talks about nesting systems in his talk as well, that you have the game, and the game consists of 15 players. So the 15 players are a system. The tactics that they're playing to is a system. The individual player in that is part of the system. Take one player out of that, you've no longer got that system. That player, as you just said, I've got the player who's run 60 meters fastest in the league. But if he can't do that as part of the 15, or he makes bad decisions because every time he gets it, he tries to run as fast as he can, that doesn't serve a higher purpose or function. He in himself is his own system. He can run really, really fast. But if he's not connected to the team with that speed, it's not part of that higher system. So in a way, it helps you then just sort of keep thinking down the chain. And it's not to be reductionist, but the why the system is the solution for is that if you do analysis of your player and you see that they just don't have any force production. So what system are you going to work on? You're going to keep sprinting them. Well, that's one option. Or you might say they need to be better at finding force. Well, they're going to find force in two ways. Either they've got to develop the ability to produce more force, or they find more force by becoming a better mover in terms of where their foot placements are. So there's two systems, right? Let's just go sprint and let's work on technique, or let's get you stronger. One nests within the other. Which one's right, which one's wrong? That's OODA loop, like you mentioned just now, right? You've made your observation. You're looking at the systems that are interplaying with each other. You're looking at the elements within each of those systems. And in this case, we're saying maybe they're not strong enough. Okay, so I've orientated myself now around that problem, and I've got some decisions to make. I'm either just going to run and work on technique, on foot placement, so they're accessing the force available, or I'm just going to get them a lot stronger. And so you make that decision. You've got limited time. You've got a call to make. You can't necessarily say, well, I'm going to do both. Maybe you just got to let the training in the games themselves, and maybe bring a little bit of awareness to them of foot placements, and they're not striding out too far or they're getting a better projection angle as they're moving off. Give them a little bit of awareness of that. So you touch upon that. But the areas that you're really going to tax and train is going to be strength, so you put that plan into action. You've now got to observe that plan in action. How do I know it's working? So you might have some measurables, you might speak to the player. You might look at that move that coach has said, I need him to get there a little bit quicker. So you've got levels of assessment then nested within this system as well that you can look at, not just your battery of tests telling you he's got quicker, because that's then only one part, right? It now needs to connect to the next level of the system. So hopefully that gives a little bit of practical example, but a little bit of theory behind it as well.
It does, and I like that you brought the OODA loop back in this, but from the coach's perspective, and us as coaches, our job, we can actually, we have to go through that lens and through that decision-making process, and then taking action, and then observing again to decide what the next step is to make. So it's funny how that, a bit of a meta conversation between, well, here there's the decision that the player needs to make on the field, but there's also then the decision that the coach has to make in regards to how he's going to program and plan, move forward, reanalyze, reassess, and go with it.
Yeah, and there's constraints to that, right? I mean, let's take when I was with Sheffield Eagles and they were part-time. I might have had access to that weight room once a week, but I'm out on the field with them 3 times a week, So individually around the squad, how do I deal with that one player now? Well, really you can't, but you need to mailbox, what Dan Paff calls mailboxing. Maybe organize your players, into different issues that they have. So when you are on that field practice, you can set up your 25, 30 minutes, maybe with slightly different emphases. Maybe these people over here are doing plyometric jumps, into sprints. Maybe these people who are just doing the sprints. So how do I look at those systems and recognize that, plyometrics is a form of strength training. Is strength training a form of plyometrics? Maybe not, but can it make plyometrics better? Again, you're looking at how things sort of nest and interrelate with each other too. So that becomes difficult, doesn't it? And so sometimes maybe the decision is forced on you. That, really I've got more opportunity to do this in the field than I have in the weight room. So there's the discussion with the player in that part-time environment, right? Hey, listen, you really got to get to a weight room outside of here, to try and do this. And people listening to this might be surprised that a player at a semi-professional or high amateur level doesn't have access to weight rooms, but that's the reality, right? And depends on their job. I mean, I remember working with Pete, he was a concrete breaker. That was his job. He wasn't coming in and wanting to do a load of high intensity stuff, at the same time. So you have to look at the individual situations a little bit and the constraints in your environment, and that's okay. That's none of us work in these ideal situations, and I think through the Need for Speed course that really makes you realize it's okay. Just consider your options and have a thought process you're going through that allows you to keep, with trial and error, just nudging things forward. And we get caught in this world of everything trying to be so precise. We talk about that a lot in the course as well, that precision versus significance. It's okay to fail forward safely, and change your mind. It's okay for it not to be exactly what's in the research. Dr. Sophia Nymphius makes a great point that really the most admirable challenge is that those of us who look what's in the research, we try and apply it, realize it doesn't work, but then we're prepared to adapt it to our situation and then report back to people how that is actually working as well. So, just be confident, encourage yourselves to think problems through, and recognize that every solution isn't in a book and a research paper, and that the system you're working on, you need to understand that it needs to connect with the next level of that system. If it isn't and it's not connected, then you're looking at the wrong picture. And ultimately, the big picture is the game itself, right? How does it influence what they do in the game itself? And right? I mean, think about, how do you get buy-in with players? You know, do you talk about the golf game, or do you talk about how this training is going to help them in the game? What do you do?
I do exactly that. I took it a notch farther this summer when we prepared the preseason. Is I outlined my preseason, I planned it out, and then I actually made a little keynote presentation for the players, recorded it, sent it to them, and then allowed them to come and ask questions on another Zoom call.
Nice.
And simply laying it out and explaining, this is why we're doing this section here, this is why we're progressing here, this is why you're not wearing your cleats from day one, this is why we only put them on for 10 minutes at the end of session one. And in the end, I just had a bunch of guys who are all, amateur players. They train twice a week. They want to, win the game on the weekend. A bunch of them do a bit of work on the, a bit of training outside of this, but a lot of them just come to Tuesday, Thursday training, and that's what they get. And what I found is that I had, between 30 and 40 guys all preseason long, which was about 6 weeks. It's the biggest numbers we'd ever had for preseason at the club. And you just saw guys were invested in it because they knew why they were there and they knew why we were doing what we were doing. And that was a huge step forward for me and a big learning, opportunity, that the clearer your communication is. And obviously it worked well because I knew the guys before and I had done a year with them prior. Maybe, barreling into a new club and doing it like that might not have worked because I didn't have that relationship with them prior to, but definitely in that situation, I think it was the best way to do it. And it was huge from a buy-in perspective.
You made me think to reflect on something you said a little bit earlier about, the player that's fast but doesn't do it in the game, and sometimes you get those academy players that come up and, they're off the mark, right? And they're fast, but they're off the mark in terms of what's going on. And here's the interesting fact, and it sounds really simple, but I don't know how we all necessarily always think about this. You cannot be faster in the game than you are running in a straight line, right? Yeah. Because as soon as you go, there's more information. Information slows you down. It just does, and the more complex that information and your inability to process it, the slower you're going to be. So, these academy players that come up because they've not played with these players, or the environment's different, or again, just the patterns out there are different. And that's kind of why it's important that academies are linked to their first team, right, in style of play and things like that. So, the way they see patterns and things need to be somewhat similar. But you can't run faster in the game than how fast you can run. That makes sense. And
it does, yeah.
The information's key, isn't it?
Yeah, I like what you just said. It reminds me, it's the same on the conditioning side. If you look, for example, at a, cyclical capacity, maximum capacity, if you want to talk about VO2 max, is always going to be either equal or above your, sport specific capacity. Because now there's maybe for very, let's say, cyclical sports, your performance is going to be highly correlated to your VO2 max. But then once you introduce game variables and skills and decision making, that's always going to, take it at least a notch down. And so, sometimes just training the sport is good enough, but when you reach that ceiling of, maybe my game speed is the same as my absolute speed, if we want to qualify it like that, now you need to transition and work on that aspect to get the ceiling a little bit higher, because you're not going to break through that ceiling in the game itself.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and also I guess the question comes on why should we train like track athletes, right? Same question, why do we all get so anal about weightlifting technique, right? There's the technical model to work to. Why shouldn't we aspire to build towards that technical model? But none of us are going to lift the loads that elite weightlifters lift. None of us are going to get near the speeds, or at the speeds that, elite track and field athletes play at. But, one of the things is that we speak about information. I don't want my player thinking, can I get there? They should know they've got the speed to get there. Let's take that information away from them. When I'm running upright, and I've got the ball in my hand, or I'm breaking away, I don't want to be thinking, oh, is my hamstring going to go? Information, that's noise. No, it's not relevant information. So I think spending some time on the rules as we call them, learning the rules of acceleration and upright running, acceleration to top end speeders, or sprinting, by the way, the upright running style and acceleration, we have that difference in the shapes and the patterns there that we talk about in the book. But getting people efficient at that and confident in that, don't you think that kind of takes some of the information out that they have to process? What's your thoughts on that?
Can you reframe that a little bit?
So, can I get off the mark? I don't feel that distance is too far for me. Or when I'm upright and I'm supporting my guy, can I make another little break? It's, the idea of, do they have the ability to do something, shouldn't even be in their thinking,
No, they should be just, doing what feels right on the moment. And then, if they do feel like they're limited and they can't express what they're looking to express, or they feel like they could express it, to a wider extent or bigger extent or a faster extent, then we need to come back to the training aspect and how we fix that.
Yeah, getting feedback from the players on that's going to be key as well, right? But then being part of that decision-making process.
Yeah, like you said, getting the point of view of the athlete and what do they feel when they're doing it. That can sometimes give us a lot of information that can guide the coaching process, or even just what cue you're going to use with them or what you're going to tell them, depending on what they felt, might just do the trick in some instances, and you don't need to go through a whole training block.
Hey, and there's a great example of non-linear progression, right? You 6 weeks of training, you give them one cue and boom, it's done. It's like, there you go, right? We get these breakthrough moments. And Cam Joss talks to that in the course as well, but there's breakthrough moments, and things just seem to, the stars align, and it happens because it just resonates and clicks with a player. And that's kind of one of the reasons we've got so many different contributors to the course, is that it's good to hear the way different people talk about the same thing, because you pick up different cues and you're able to use those cues in a variety of ways to influence maybe how that person is moving, or help them with their meaning and understanding of how they need to move in the game. And one thing comes to mind, the framework that Stuart built for decision making in there. What's the problem? First of all, is it clear? Is it a simple problem, a clear problem, or is it complicated? You have you can think of your rugby forwards, right? They're lunging out and their arms out, and their shoulder gets hurt in the tackle because they just haven't manoeuvred into the right position to be effective in the collision, and this guy's doing it time and time again. So is that a clear problem, or a complicated problem, or a complex problem? So how do you then, what's the next level of thinking you go to once you identify the nature of the problem? Do you train them in context? Do you simplify, or do you decontextualize? And, just do some with, stepping drills. Go through ladders laterally or something, right? I mean, I'm not a big fan of that, but that's the options, right, as well. And then that helps with the methodology that you're about to choose, the type of training that we're going to do with those people. And then, is that problem then managed? So I think that the framework, decision-making framework that Stu come up with as well, helps us alongside that OODA loop approach, identify the methodology we would like to employ. And we mentioned constraints earlier as well, in terms of your training environment. So when you looked at that framework, did you have any kind of thoughts around that?
Well, I think what you mentioned in, breaking down a problem that you see on the field of play, and then determining what is going to be the right, solution to fix that problem. For me, it's almost how far back are you going to have to go to make it accessible to that player at that point in time, to then build him back up to what he needs to do in the game. Maybe it's as simple as just, give him a clear instruction or a cue that he's never heard before, or that maybe didn't resonate in the past, and now he's able to do that right away. Maybe, like you said, you have to peel, one layer off the onion and go back to something outside of a, kind of a high physical and emotional stressful situation in the game, and maybe remove the opposition, and now you can get him moving better. Maybe that's not enough. Maybe you have to go all the way back to, like you said, can he shuffle laterally effectively without tripping over his own feet? Maybe that's how deep the problem is. And then following that sequence back up, how fast can I go? Can I skip some steps on the way back and still retain everything that I need to retain? And then down the line, when I have to make another decision about a similar case, now I have that experience about the framework that I used previously. Can I use the same one? Is that different player going to respond to the same sequencing of different exercises going back up to the situation in the game? So it just adds a lot of, for me, the framework adds some clarity to the process of thinking about problems. So that's the main thing that I got out of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, practically, you know, when I could think of this particular forward right now, and it was almost again what they saw alarmed them, right? So it wasn't a let's get at them. It was just that momentary delay, which then meant based on where the opposing player was, they move laterally rather than forward. Now, being big players, you know, they kind of topple, right? So that gives them a sense of danger again. So they go wide in their base. Now they're wide in their base. They lack maneuverability. The good attacking player is going to spot that shape. So they're going to run on an angle to the side. So they're only left with that lunge and that shoulder into the player, right? You know, and you can picture that. So, you know, what I learned from the acceleration elements was that, you know, the projection, rhythm, and rise. Now, these big guys are not going to have the same projection angles as your shorter guys. They're not starting in a crouched position, right? They are starting more upright. You know, I play with a drill, and I use ladders for this because I think it helped visually, where they would start in the first rung of the ladder, and, you know, they would, you know, you'd set up some kind of defensive tackle drill where they would then break out and accelerate forward. Then you start them in the second rung. What does that mean? Their projections are going to change because they're going to step outside it, you know. So it just built an understanding, if you like, that you're telling the brain that, hey, you've got the capacity to do this. You know, you can change that a little bit, where these guys typically like to stay upright, right? Working with those big tour athletes. So just working on the acceleration, using some of the, you know, the coaching cues and the, you know, the identification of the shapes and patterns from that really helped in this situation, because the player didn't feel like they could get off the mark fast. You know, they're big, heavy guys. They feel that ground under their feet and think the ground's their enemy. You know, the ground's their friend. Push against it. It's helping you, you know. Push that ground, you know, down and back, and rather than it feeling heavy underneath their body, you know. So that was, I think that really helped me, you know, from a straight sort of track acceleration technical model perspective to work through this particular problem.
I want to go to another session in the book 3, which is about posture. And I've read you say on the Agora, the Facebook group that ALTIS holds for all coaches to converse and exchange. I've heard you say that for you, it was one of the most important parts of the course that Stu actually added later on. I mean, maybe a month or a couple months after the course was released, and we'll come back to that kind of dynamic nature of the course later on. But why is that posture session chapter so important for you?
It kind of brought together so many different sessions from the course. So it didn't just bring together the technical components, if you like, but it went right back to the speed model as well, and content, context, skill, ability. When you see players fatiguing, they lose posture. You know, you see that player who's, you know, they're running and all of a sudden their head's bobbing from side to side, and, you know, the arms are everywhere. There's certain postures that you see they're able to hold, you know. Shapes are points in time. How they're connected in time is the patterns the limbs will go through. The temporal nature of that, the timing then is then the rhythm, you know. But in order for that to all come together and actually apply force into the ground appropriately, they have to be able to maintain a very dynamic posture. You know, and that is, you know, both upper body and lower body positions as well. So a lot of the time from our learning as strength and conditioning coaches, why I felt it was very important for us as a strength and conditioning profession is that we view posture based on FMS, based on static positions a lot of the time, or we view them based on shapes and patterns that we recognize in the weight room a lot more as well. So it was great that Stuart broke that out of the rhythm section and expanded that more, because also when you stop seeing a kind of smoothness in posture, John Kiley spoke to this, is that a signal now that motor coordination is off? Maybe something isn't quite firing properly. Maybe it's telling us about their capacity. 640s is enough. They're now losing posture. They still might be getting the same knee height, right? All the other things we might identify as our key points you see, but together you just see the posture is just dynamically not as well controlled. So that's maybe a time to shut the session down. So again, the importance to me as strength and conditioning coaches was understanding posture from a sprinting point of view, how it might indicate potential for injury, shut the session down, or the capacity of that player. But for me, it just connected so many of the dots as well, around the rules for sprinting in our team sports athletes.
I wanted to come back to the overtime activities that you mentioned before. So can you give an overview of what those activities are, how they're structured throughout the course? You talked about the training camps. There's also, smaller activities that are given to you along the course after each session is completed. So where did those come from and how are they integrated in the course?
I reflected on my own experiences more recently, really, over the last 5 to 8 years of other courses that I've been on. Precision nutrition with John Berardi, and then Molly Galbraith and her team at Girls Gone Strong. And I kind of compared and contrasted those to other kind of courses. And as a learner, that I hated writing notes down a page. I was a mind map kind of person. That's me. But I thought, what do I really enjoy in that engagement? What was I fearful of? How did I learn best? What really stuck in my mind? And the fact is, 100% of the content is not going to stick in my mind, right? I need to make connections and links to things that, I can't be conscious about all that information. So I wanted to try and take an approach within the course around all the content that was being built for it, to try and present it in different ways. And again, non-linearly, that you don't have to do this progressively. You don't have to do every single part. So let's just break down one single session. So the session will start with a brief, just like you'd start a coaching session. What's in it for me? Let's rather than your athletes go, oh, we're just lifting again today. Why is this so important to you to be here right now? How is this going to help you improve? What's it building upon? So the session briefs attempt to let the individual know why I'm asking them to spend 20 to 40 minutes of their time. The other key thing is, I'm going to try and give you an indication of what the essentials of this session, how long that will last for. But like any session, you come out of it and you go, oh, I found that tough. Wasn't as good as that as I thought I'd be. So maybe there's things to work on. So the debrief at the end allows you to reflect back on that session, identify any knowledge gaps or maybe practical gaps that you might have. So it's done in a much more of a questioning style rather than just giving you take homes. And that bookends each kind of session. But then after that, or within that, you have deeper dives inside the session where, based on your reflections, you go, yeah, I wouldn't mind knowing a lot more about this topic. So it gives you an opportunity to go deeper. Now, again, the non-linear side, you might not want to do that now. You might want to come back to that later. Right now, I'm okay that I kind of know enough. But as you go through, and it might be a year later, you hit another problem, you go, yeah, I remember that from the Need for Speed book. This is not a book you tuck away or a course you put on in your bottom drawer, on your bottom shelf. You're going to go back to this. You know, let's see if there's more there for me to get out of this particular section. So the deeper dives give you that opportunity. And sometimes it's more text, sometimes it's deeper videos. There's YouTube links in there as well. Even in book 3, it refers you back to book 2 on the kinogram and gets you to, you know, go back to review and revise the kinogram. If people aren't familiar with that, it's a free resource on the ALTIS website as to how to video and take snapshots of your athletes running as well. So that's, you know, set as an optional task. The pro tips they're just quick and easy kind of golden nuggets, I call them, you know, that I just felt that in the interviews with the coaches, they expressed something in a really good way that I either caught on video or I'd put into a quick quote that hopefully just makes the penny drop on something or contributes towards the penny dropping. The video reviews are a coach's review of that topic, something they practically are going to draw to you. You know, John Goodwin talks a lot about skills and abilities. You know, Rob Gray talking about the perception action side of stuff to help you get a deeper meaning and understanding. Hey, look, if you feel you know that area well, you could skip the video reviews. But even the way I introduce those to you is written to say, hey, this is what you're going to get out of this. It's not, hey, here's Rob Gray talking about perception action coupling. I'm trying to say, you know, what are you going to get from reading this or listening to this? The video reviews, though, are contained in the overall time of the session. So you just shorten your session time down if you looked at that. And then we have kind of assignments, if you like, as well. The skills practices, kind of a quirky thing came up. You mentioned this earlier, what changed when we were writing the course. I kind of wanted to give it a bit of a team sport feel. So I wanted to call them sessions rather than modules, briefings, debriefs, video review, as opposed to video stop, as was in previous courses. Pro tips I liked. I always remember working with a cricket coach, Graham Fowler, up at the University Centre of Excellence, Durham University, and he said, the best coaching conversations always happen in the bar. You know, and the players, you know, it's those sidebar conversations that don't always come from the main session itself. So the pro tips were kind of a little bit of an homage to that in a way, you know, a little bit of a, hey, here's just something you might want to hear. It's kind of cool, you know. Yeah. But then the skills practices, I don't want to call them assignments. It sounded too academic-y for me, although, you know, I know a lot of our people are superbly bright who are following this course. But it was also a case of like, this is something you can do in a mental sense. It'll be more of a thought process practice to think things through. And actually, because of COVID, I chose to balance the skills practice between go and actually practically do versus this might be get some video of someone you've already got and think this through. Because, you know, recognizing, I know it's different in different parts of the world, but people may not be able to go out and coach during this course as well. So the skills practices are based on this session. Let's go and do this stuff. Let's go and try it out. But if you can't do it live with someone, then maybe we can do that by capturing some video that you've already got. Or if you haven't, reach out to your network, you know. And that's another big part of the program, was trying to build a community. And the team talks were my attempt to say, hey, go to the Facebook page of the Agora Council for ALTIS and put your question out there. Tell people what you're learning right now. Henry Barrera has done a brilliant job with that with his notes, posting all those on Twitter as well. Strangely enough, people are a little bit reticent. People are a little bit cautious on putting stuff out there. And we definitely want to explore and examine how we can create more engagement and things as well in the future. So we're looking for that sort of feedback on that. And then the final, I guess, task is what we call the personal development plans. Every player's got that, right? They have their personal improvement plan. We as coaches, you know, what's our career development plan? So there's two kind of thrusts on that. The first one was very linear and clear. Create a presentation for yourself. Through the course, what material can you borrow and steal that helps you devise a presentation that I honestly think you're going to keep for the rest of your life. You will build upon it. You'll use parts of it. It's almost like a way of that. I wanted you to create a vehicle upon which you're going to hang all the information you feel is relevant for you right now, and will help you have that presentation with the head coach about why we should be training speed, or with the physiotherapy department. This is why we should be training speed. So the presentation is like a scaffolding project. It builds all the way through the course. The second one is kind of open and very non-linear. It was built a little bit around Fergus Connolly's 4 coactives approach, looking at the technical, physiological and mental aspects of the game, and really saying whose major area of responsibility is each of those areas. Do you have a team you work with? How are you working together? So it was about, if you're an isolated coach, encouraging you to go out there and build a network. Encouraging you to talk more to your current network. And again, in COVID times that we've been experiencing, we don't get to see people face to face all the time. We don't, and so networking, while it went huge with Zoom and everything else that we're doing, I found that we kind of like putting thumbs up and emojis to all our friends and pals out there, but we weren't really talking. So maybe get off a lot of the generic podcasts and stuff that's out there. Get connections with your immediate groups. Get your own little groups together and start having some meaningful discussions. Don't be distant. So the second one would then explore problems through the course and say, so how would you handle this? Who would you speak to? Who else could support you in this problem? Especially, around some of the conversations around, is sprinting a vaccine as an injury prevention mechanism? When it comes to warm-ups and rehabilitation, who else is involved in those discussions? Who's involved in the discussion around why are we training speed for this team for? Some coaches just believe they take care of all that, but how they manage the game, as well. So the second personal development plan is a little bit more abstract, but I do feel it helps maybe some of our younger coaches to feel confident in going out and asking those questions. Be curious, create your networks for better learning and to help you solve problems. So a myriad of things, everything done very deliberately, but and you're not expected to choose to do everything. I do think there's something for everyone in what they choose to take on as extra curriculum work outside of just what's bookended in each session between the brief and the debrief. I just wanted it to be a much better experience than just do a course.
So before we move forward with the conversation, I want to throw in a question that we got from Instagram. So we're lucky to have 2-time Olympian and alpine speed skier Marie-Michelle Gagnon ask a question for you today. So she asks, how can we apply the need for speed principles in a competitive ski start?
Yeah, something that which we have been doing, both with Travis Gagnon and Marie. And, the main part, again, is going back to the biomechanics and the force application. That the way and I looked at some top skiers' starts and their ability to actually just project that center of mass, explosively and rapidly forward and control then their projection, that their rise and their rhythm coming out. So I looked at it in that context. And, end of the day, they're on a downslope. They've got big planks of wood on. They've got arms. They've got a gate in most cases that they've got to get around. And, it almost boiled down to the first two movements, the first two steps. It was get out. It was vertical force production. It was, boom, boom, those first two steps, which is acceleration, right? And you couldn't expect them to keep doing that because they got planks of wood on their feet. But those first two and their angle of their projection just meant they got out with more force. And that translates then once they're going into that first part. Now they're using their arms to keep that going. And again, it's only 2 or 3 arm strokes, really. They're not, too much contact with the ground. And what we were trying to do was avoid that side to side, which once upon a time used to be an acceleration technique back in the day, right? Was run, push side to side, So it was definitely more vertical force application, translating into that kind of more horizontal application, which came from the projection of the body and how they would put their foot into the snow, onto the ground, through the skis in those first 2 steps. And I mean, Travis has reported that where normally in training he's tenths of a second away from the other top guys, this time around he's hundredths of a second as well. So the next step really is obviously working with the ski coaches themselves to find ways of applying this actually on the slopes. I think Marie and Travis have been doing that themselves, but Marie's coach I think is definitely working a little bit more with her on that technically on the hill as well.
No, it's great to see that the principles that you convey, in the 3 books of the course actually have some application in sports outside of just running sports, which just speaks widely about the breadth and the depth of the course itself.
Well, Matt Price from the LA Kings I've only interviewed recently, so there will be a course update coming out around December time with some new stuff as well going in. So watch out for that announcement sometime in December. That's ice hockey. So again, another different sport to think about.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into something that I wanted to come back to. You talked about a course that we can come back to later on. And it is a course that's going to keep evolving, keep growing, keep morphing over time. So why that dynamic nature instead of the usual way of doing things, which is write an online course, publish it, and then move on to the next one?
Well, we've created 3, keystone courses. The Performance Trinity of the Foundation course, the Need for Speed course, and the ALTIS Performance Therapy course. And, they really bond together to give you a complete picture of how we go about our work at ALTIS. And, these they can't stand still as new information comes forward. As we're looking to keep it improving, we'll keep modifying and adding elements to that. Sometimes directly into the course, maybe in other ways. But it's not like your 4th edition of Mikado Catch and Catch. That becomes the 5th edition, which you don't bother to buy, or you buy Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning 1 year, and then the new version comes out 2 years later, which you've got to buy again. No, once you've bought those Performance Trinity courses, those updates and things are all just part of what you've already bought into, as well. So that's kind of cool, I think, and kind of neat that we're always looking to evolve and improve.
And I think it makes total sense given the digital nature of the course and the fact that you can update it without having to have someone purchase a new, piece of something that contains the information. And it is a very fair way, let's say, to do it. Maybe all online courses should be like that, because like you said, new information comes in, new research is conducted, new hypothesis may be answered or disproven, and that needs to be reflected in the material if you want your course to be valid, 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now.
Yeah. The performance therapy course right now, we're doing an audit and a review of that. To, when I say do a relaunch, if you're already on it, you've already got it, right? But that's obviously to appeal to new people, and maybe re-engage people with the course as well. So it isn't, like I say, lying there dormant, that we're listening to feedback and stuff that we're getting to, maybe re-engineer some of what we've done.
I've got a couple last questions for you today, Nick. The first one is, if you'd had access to this course when you were a younger coach, what would you have done differently?
Well, that's a really good question. Quite honestly, 2 things. Look at the game more and maybe do a better analysis of looking at the speed demands in the game. Like everyone, I started from the start. Let's test them. How strong are they? They're not very fast. Let's make them faster, rather than knowing what impact that would have on them. And probably the most significant information is the information on upright running. You know, everything I did was acceleration, deceleration, change of direction. You know, and Ken Clark's work, and again, it kind of talks to systems, right? Upright running improves your acceleration. We all think upright running only segues into, acceleration segues into upright running. But again, the system is the solution, right? You know, upright running form and technique. You know, I felt I started to do a bit more of that with Sheffield Eagles, but that to me is something I would spend a lot more time focusing on. You know, sprinting is the apex of athleticism, there's a quote in it. And the more I started to ponder on that, I went and myself as an athlete now, almost 50-year-old, training right now, I'm like, you know what? Yeah, even the thought of trying to sprint and run upright right now is like painful to think about. But when you say, how would I feel if I was running gracefully and elegantly, you go, you know what? Actually, I'm probably going to be smooth in my squats. My mobility is going to feel great, you know. The upright running side is definitely an area that I would value the most.
Yeah, there's that fluidity of a sprint that's well executed when you're standing up that has some, yeah, it's hard to describe because of how, I guess, complex it is, but at the same time simple when you look at it from the outside. And again, when it's done with such, you know, grace and ease that the effort is barely noticeable at all in the sprint itself. What do you wish, when I say you, is you collectively at ALTIS, what do you wish this course brings to the sports performance field?
Look, overall, we really believe in the power of coaching to change people's lives. And that's both us as coaches and our career development and what we might achieve with our athletes, but also how we then, you know, impart that on our athletes and, you know, help them be healthy and perform well. So really that's the essence of everything that we do. And it might sound quite dramatic, but yeah, I hope this changes people's lives.
Nick, it was a great pleasure to have you back on, and specifically today to talk about this great course that you guys have released. Where can people find out more about this course?
So please follow our social media, both on the ALTIS Twitter account and the ALTIS Instagram account. We also have the ALTIS EDU account, which is focused much more on the education side of stuff. You can go to www.altis.world and go to our education section on there and look at a breakdown, as well as a number of free ebook PDF resources that you can have some fun with those as well.
Yeah, so for anybody who's not aware of the work that ALTIS is putting out, please go check out their website, go download the free resources to get an idea of how far they go into things. And then I would strongly urge you to consider this course if you are a coach that has to train coach speed at some point or another. It is an invaluable resource. Nick, thanks again for coming on today.
Thank you, Sean. I really appreciate you having me. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Of course. Take care, man.